Okay, thank you, and hello everyone. My name is Mercy. I am a final year PhD candidate at the University of Bath, and I would be sharing a presentation on the messy realities of anti-colonial research, reimagining language practices in Nigerian secondary school as part of the SWTDP data analysis webinar series. So in this presentation today, I have divided it into three parts. I think before I can look into the data analysis conversation, I have to introduce my research, what my research is about briefly, and then focus a little bit on the ethics and methodological decisions, then go into the data analysis, and then some concluding reflections while trying to stick to time. So I would continue quickly now. So my research that I'm presenting today is part of my doctoral thesis, which the title is Agency and Resistance as Anti-Colonial Praxis, Reimagining Language Practices in Nigerian Secondary School. And to do the research, I had to go for a 5-month fieldwork in a Nigerian secondary school. Nigeria has a colonial heritage, the result of past colonial rule, as is the case with most African countries. And as a result of that, English is the main language used in Nigeria as the official language in education and every other official setting. For a little bit of context, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, with over 200 million people. Right now, I think the statistic says about 236. We're also the most linguistically diverse nation in Africa and third in the world. We have about 500 languages, which account for 18 to 20% of Africa's linguistic diversity. English is the most spoken language in Nigeria, followed by the Nigerian Pidgin. But then the Nigerian Pidgin is not seen as a good enough language, so it is not really considered as a language in itself. English is the official medium, but then we have three other national languages, which is Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. Now, if you go to rural settings or rural places in Nigeria, we have what they call like a homogeneous language group you find in school settings. But then when you go to urban schools, which I went to, you realize that in a classroom, you get to have students from many different language groups. I think in the school I went to, we had over 50 different language groups in the school. So that is the difference between urban and rural area in terms of language disparity or whatever. So the summary of language and education literature have always focused on the instructional part of language in the classroom, with very few literatures connecting the issue of language used in education to broader issues of epistemic exclusion, gender issues or cultural issues, and other socioeconomic issues. However, during the literature review, we found out that very little um, research have actually looked at other spaces within the school aside the classroom. And that is why my research focuses on school language practices in non-classroom settings or non-classroom spaces, even though we understand that some of those spaces are influenced by what happens in the classroom. And the idea is to transform those practices that continue to marginalize indigenous or local languages and prioritize colonial languages, particularly in Nigerian case, English. So to do that, my research had asked two questions. Although the main research, as with most PhD, has like babies, I just brought just these two so it will look very succinct. So how do school policies govern language practices within Nigerian secondary school? Particularly, we're looking at how these practices and policies extend beyond the classroom, and if there are instances of students resisting these practices. And then the second question is looking at how can the anti-colonial praxis be employed to confront language practices in Nigerian secondary school. And particularly, we're looking at what are the avenues already available avenues already available in the school that can be leveraged to amplify local languages. And of course, the second part of the question is looking at the obstacles to that. In this presentation, I won't really be sharing the findings. In other presentation, I have shared the findings, but I will just stop here and now move towards like the ethics, methodological, and data analysis, which is mostly what this particular webinar is about. So the ethics and methodology. So when I was about going for my field work, as with most universities, we have to do what we call an ethics at Bath, where there is this big template where you have to explain what you want to do in the field, how you want to collect, how you plan to generate data, how you plan to access the field, the gatekeepers, everything, how you plan to manage your data, how you plan to do the entire research even before you go to the field. But then after you get all this approved, they more or less tell you that you can go and do data, you can go and do your research in wherever country you're doing your research, which I found really confusing as because why is the UK giving me permission to do research in another country without putting it into cognizance or making it a priority that, oh, you have to get approval from that country. But as a decolonial researcher, I realized for me, getting the permission from the local ethics was even more important than institutional ethics. So that is what I did. But then there was also a problem where I wanted to have a participatory research, but then I was limited by institutional frameworks that warranted that I had to do a full ethics, deciding the methods I wanted to use, even before meeting my collaborators to discuss what would work well for them. So to be able to ensure that I stay true to my decolonial ethos, while also engaging with what the institutions wanted from me, I decided to have two strategies. The first one was to design a flexible methodological design. Now, this design allowed me to say, oh, my research is broken down into two phases. The next screen, I'll show you what I mean by that. And in my first phase, I plan to do this or this or this or this. So I had like about 4 different options that I wanted the learners to choose from. And then the whole idea was if I come to the field with already predestined methods or pre-approved methods, the fact that there were many methods meant my collaborators had a chance to have a voice in the method itself. And the second strategy was having a supplementary ethics as an in-between space between institutional ethics and anti-colonial, decolonial participatory research, where the university had given me approval to do things in a certain way. I go to the field and my collaborators had given me some ideas that are important to them. And I want the ideas to be integrated into the research. What I had to do was to create a supplementary ethics involving or infusing all the ideas to make the research as much theirs as it was mine. I also wanted methods that amplify the voices of the learners because most of the literatures always came from teachers' perspective, adult perspective, policymakers' perspective. Very few focused a lot on the learners. And I wanted the learners to like be at the forefront of the research. And I also had to navigate and negotiate my positionality as both an insider and outsider. I'm a Nigerian. I went to school in the same city that I am doing my research in. I knew about 1 or 2 teachers that taught me in my secondary school. They were in this school that I was doing my research in. My age positioned me as not a teacher per se, not an average teacher, but closer to the ages of the students, while also closer to the ages of the teachers. So sometimes they saw me as an insider because I was aware of the cultural nuances of the community. They know me. Some of them knew me when I was younger, but also I was also seen as an outsider because I was coming in as a researcher, wanting to understand the language practices. So I had to constantly navigate and negotiate that position. So this is the table of my methodology where I divided because I was going to spend 5 months in the field, and the 5 months was splitted in between 2 terms. And then for the first 2 months, they were going to be in 1 term. Then there will be like a 1 month break for Christmas and New Year. And then I was going to spend another 2 months. So what I did was in the first 2 months, I only engaged with the students. So initially I had map making, and after map making, they had to choose between talk circle, walking tour, or informal conversation. But then they collaboratively said they wanted to have a talk circle because they felt the groupings they had for the map making was a safe space for them to discuss why they chose the kind of the maps they chose. And then they felt that the walking tour was too risky because it risks them talking about different places and teachers hearing them and punishing them. So this was the map making we had. And then the map was like pictures were taken of 10 spaces in the school where the students had to use colors to talk about spaces that they felt were safe for them to speak their local languages, which were greens. Spaces where it was not safe for them to use their local language because they would more or less punish them 100 times, 10 times out of 10 times if they speak their local language or the Nigerian Pidgin in those spaces. And spaces where sometimes it is safe, sometimes it was not safe. For some of these places, they had like a definite yes or no. But for others, some students said red, some people said blue, some people said green, some people said yellow, some people said blue. So with the talk circle, we discussed the rationale for those colorings in those spaces. And then after that, I did an observation where based on the map, I looked at those spaces and looked at like what was happening in those spaces based on what they had said to me. So during the Christmas period, I made sense of the data to help me design the second part of the research. And the second part was when I had to engage with students, teachers, parents, the principal. We had storytelling, focus group discussion, interviews, and then we also had drama. Drama was something that was added by the student that was not initially part of my initial method. They wanted drama to embody and visualize their experience in the school in a place where the teachers and the principals and school authorities were present for them to see how what they were doing was devaluing their local languages. So after that phase, I did what they call the initial participatory analysis with the students, where some of the data was brought to the student for them to form initial codes while in the field. This was done to ensure that their voices remained with the research even after I left the field. So these are some pictures from the drama. The drama took place throughout the second phase. We had a lot of rehearsals and it was an amazing experience. The teachers were present and it also like changed the teachers' perception to how they were policing and governing language practices. And the students, even though they suggested the idea of the drama, they were not just idle participants, they were collaborators and we worked collaboratively together. For example, for the drama, based on all the stories they had told me, I discussed with them some of the ideas for the drama. We agreed on the ideas, and then I created a script for the drama and gave it to them. And they came back and canceled some things and said things like, oh, some of these things you're saying, we won't say it like this, we'll say it like this. And it made them more or less be at the forefront of their own experiences, which is something that is very central to decolonial methodologies and research. It's about amplifying voices. So some of the organization tips that I had to do, more or less data management tips when handling my data, was because I had a lot of data. I had to create like an Outlook folder for research, for like research data generation. I had a folder that just wrote my name and my fieldwork. And then the folder was divided by my phases because I had two phases just so that I won't get confused and I'll be able to like store the data properly. So I had phase 1 and phase 2. And in phase 1, for example, I had map making, talk circle, and then phase 2, I had like parents, teachers, I had interviews for parents, those kind of things. And things like maps that were co-produced by the students. What I did was we took pictures of the map to have a digital copy while the main copy were given to the students. And then I used audio recorder on my phone for recording things like the focus group, interviews, stories, and the talk circle. So to ensure that, because I was having lots of recording, I had to save it with the group, the method, and the dates. And then I had in my journal written down like the dates that I was doing the interviews so I can cross-check to ensure that I wasn't getting confused with the many data. And then when I did the transcripts and I saved the transcript, I removed the recording to protect the anonymity of my collaborators. Now, in terms of data analysis, my data analysis was a messy process because at the end of my research, I had a lot of data. I had 56 maps. The maps were divided across 11 groups of students that did the talk circle. Some of the students were 4, 5, 6. I think we had 6 were the highest of group of students, and the average was like an hour. We had about 25 interviews. We had 14 stories. We had focus groups participate. So we had so much data, and because my research is looking at how English is being positioned as a superior language to our local languages, The first strategy was to ensure that not all the methods were verbal, which was why map making was very important, right? It was a non-verbal method. But then even when we were speaking, because of the many languages that we have in Nigeria, like I mentioned in the beginning, I didn't want a situation where if we had allowed them to use local languages, I can't hear local languages. So we came to a conclusion that, oh, we could use the Nigerian Pidgin because everybody can hear the Nigerian Pidgin and they can use English as well, but they were not under any obligation to speak good English with me. They could use the Nigerian Pidgin. And then because of that, when it was time for me to transcribe the data, the available transcription softwares were not picking up, first of all, some of these Nigerian Pidgin words and the accents and slangs of the students, right? Because I wanted the students to be honest to themselves and share based on what they felt comfortable with. But by doing that, there was a limitation of using softwares to transcribe this many data sets. And then I had to choose between, do I want to protect the voices of my collaborators, or do I want to ensure that I save time and use the software, even though the software might not be able to like get all the data from the student. So what I decided to do was, even though it took me longer time and it was very stressful, I had to hand transcribe, like I had to transcribe the data sets instead of using softwares because the softwares were not picking the accent and some of the Nigerian pidgin. This was because I didn't want to I didn't want speed to take precedence over the voices of my collaborators or omit something that was very much important. And aside from that, we also adapted Brown and Clark thematic analysis using the participatory data from the field. I didn't want a situation where whatever we got from the field was left because I was no longer in the field, but I wanted to ensure that the voices of my participants stayed true even after I left the field. So this is from a paper me and my first supervisor wrote about how we adapted the Brown and Clark 6-step to thematic analysis. So we added what they call the step 0, where the participatory data analysis with the learners that identified the codes were what we use as a starting point. And then we went back into the data with the code provided by the learners, and then we started identifying the gaps where what the learners said is not something what was in the data is not identified by the learners. And then we started adding new codes to add to that of to the codes that were already identified by the learners. We were refining, merging, we were grouping the codes to bigger issues and trying to ensure that the teams reflected the central idea of the code. And then at some stage, we had to at the end of the stage, some of the codes had to be rewritten, but not all of them. Some of them were the way the learners envisaged them. And for such instances, we made sure that when we were writing the findings, we made sure to give the learners we made sure to state clearly that these particular codes were actually co-produced by the learners. For example, one of the codes we had was conditioned reflex, and this was something the learners came up with during the participatory analysis. And so now in my findings, it is still conditioned reflex. So we ensure that that stayed true throughout the research. So concluding reflections, I think an anti-colonial or decolonial researcher amplifies the voices of marginalized groups or the groups that you're working with. You don't just see them as participants or places where you want to extract data. So at every point in time, you keep asking yourself, how am I amplifying the voices of this group of people that I'm working with? How am I ensuring that what they have said, their body cues? For example, I had a journal where I wrote some of the cues that the students had that were non-verbal, and I ensured that those cues were also like interpreted in my findings. If, for example, a student was not comfortable speaking and decided to keep quiet, that was an important data more than just what is being said. You work within what is available, sometimes with the intention to disrupt inherited colonial practices, like what happens in the school, Other times navigating what is available, like with the ethics. You can question the ethics or you can create a supplementary ethics to allow you to do what you want to do with the community. You also have to ensure that the voices of your collaborators are preserved at all costs. You have to ask yourself, what is the opportunity cost of maybe using softwares that may not pick up some of the things that your participants or your collaborators are saying, and which way of doing things will preserve their voices. And then lastly, you have to decide what is shared and what is preserved. Not all that is shared with you should be reported in your findings or should be reported when you're presenting your work. It is part of your duty of care to decide what to share and what to not share. So thank you very much. This is all from me. If you have any questions, we'll be looking forward to answering them.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mercy. Lots of applause there for you. Oh, we already have a, oh, was that a hand? I did see a hand. The hand is now, oh, there's another hand. Right, I will assume that this is an actual hand, and let's see, I will unmute, I will allow Roz to unmute themselves.
I hope I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. So, Mercy, first of all, thank you very much. I'm at the beginning journey, and as a Black woman, I struggle with ethics, and you've just helped me about how I'm going to negotiate. And I want to thank you for something that's really important because I struggled with this on a personal level. Not everything that I find should I report, because sometimes I feel I'm selling out my own community for white people to absorb this knowledge and then use it to get their funding and almost marginalize us or use some of the evidence in a negative way. And that's been a struggle for me. So my question is, how do we, and it's a difficult one, and I get it if you need to come back to it, where do we get to the place where we can own our knowledge and make the changes so we've moved away from the colonization and the practices that come with it? Because body language, as you know, we speak a lot with our body. Our silences speak volumes. Yet I have white researchers who are sitting on panels and I'm thinking you're missing half the cues. How do we get to the place where we own? We're decolonized and we can control and manage and speak in our own tongue. If it's too difficult, I get that.
And that's a very interesting question. And I think it is a difficult question, but it is also a very easy question because the truth is, for me, I think for me, you can only do your part and just hope that other people are doing their part and together we'll get to that stage. I don't think it's a stage we can just get to from here to here, but I think resistance comes from ensuring that we do our part in our own work, in how we choose to present our work, in how we choose to not report everything that is being said just for reporting sake, in how we choose to stand our ground, in how we choose to change how we report our findings, right? And I think this gradual step is how we get to that stage. But then it's not an easy feat. But I think the best thing you can do, the more realistic and critical thing you can do is to resist within your own rights and within your own sphere of influence. That's how I would answer the question, to be honest. And that's something I always talk to some of my colleagues that do decolonial and indigenous work. We keep battling this feeling where most times we also feel like a fraud because we are doing the kind of work we're doing in a colonial institution. But then we have to go to where people listen to start the resistance. And that's just one way I think we can do it, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Just a reminder to obviously feel free to stick questions in the Q&A. If you do have questions, you can access the Q&A feature just at the top of your screen there. But in the meantime, I'll ask one as well, if that's okay, Mercy. And I'll preface this by saying that I have very limited understanding of Nigerian society, but I also do come from a society with a colonial history, specifically Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, obviously, it is at least when I was growing up, it is a society where English was certainly kind of, the language that would socially mobilize you. And I think a lot of schools would also kind of leverage on that, and to kind of defend the importance of kind of speaking and teaching and also learning in English as opposed to kind of more local tongues. Did you kind of face any resistance against your studies when you were approaching perhaps the schools that you ended up working with, and how did you kind of address that or resolve that?
Yeah, so I faced some resistance because the school felt that I was coming to talk to the students to do something that was against the school's ethos, but also the schools were also open because I was coming from the UK. So it didn't matter that I was coming to do certain kind of work, but it just mattered to them that they were collaborating with a researcher from the UK, which also speaks to the vast problem of coloniality as well. But also my research question too looked at the obstacles, and the obstacles were very, very clear with parents, the adults, even the student talking about the obstacles to why using English is very much important. It's part of my findings, a very big chunk part of my findings, because for some students, if they don't speak English at this stage, it will ruin their global prospect, it will ruin because for example, a parent said to me, my child cannot go to university without passing English. So if the school feels like they have to punish him for him to speak English well, to pass English, so he can have a future, I think is a good opportunity cost. So those are the kind of things I had to navigate and negotiate during my field. But that's why I kept saying that I'm not even talking about the classroom. I'm looking at non-classroom spaces. Nobody's saying that English has to come at a cost, whether it is either English or local language. I'm saying they are both important, so they should both have spaces in the school as well. So that was the conversation. But thank you so much. That was a very interesting question. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Let's see. I don't see any more questions now, so perhaps we could go on to our next presenter. If you do still have questions, oh, there is a hand at the last minute. Right, let's take that question as well. I will just unmute you now, or allow you to unmute rather, Giuseppe.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I did put it in the Q&A, but maybe I didn't do it right, so apologies. But thank you, Mercy. That was such an inspiring, wonderful presentation. I really, really relate to it. I hope you can hear me okay. So my question is, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Great, thanks. So I'm really interested because I left it too late to really put in much participatory work in my ethics application. But I'm wanting to do like some form of like member checking, and I'm at data analysis stage. So I'd love to hear a bit more about how that worked in practice. Like, what was the actual process of how you worked together on data analysis? How, did you send initial codes? Did they review them, make their, come up with their own? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, what happened with the participatory analysis was, if you remember the table I shared that after the phase one, I had a month where they were on Christmas and New Year holiday. So I leveraged that to quickly do some quick analysis of what we already had. And when I was doing the other data with the other participants in the phase two, I was always like analyzing quickly, roughly what was available. And so what I did was I brought my research question to the students, and I'm like, okay, these are my research question, and this is the codes we have gotten so far. It is not 100%, it is about 70% of some of the recurring conversations coming up so far. And then they sat down group by group and talked about what they felt was important based on each of the research questions. So for example, when we asked them how do school policy extend beyond the classroom, they talked about the heightened surveillance, about how they were using cameras to surveil them. And they have very, very literal description. Like, when we do research, you have really nice way of saying, oh, sonic surveillance. No, they write things like there are cameras everywhere, there are eyes watching you. And then they were very open about what they felt were important based on the research question. So I had to use the research question to guide the conversation so they know what they are trying to answer, if that makes sense to you. So by the time I came back to the field, I had this lot of papers with everything the students have said, and then I had to write them all down and then divide them based on the research question before going back into the data again. When I had finished like transcribing the entire data, that is.
Thanks, Mercy. There's a comment from Ross who we've heard from, just wondering if your work is ready for sharing. I know from conversation with you that you've just submitted your final draft to your supervisor, but perhaps I could put you in touch with Ross after the session in case you did have anything you could share.
Yes, of course, that's lovely. We just finished one of the papers with my first supervisor. It will be out in June. One of my papers came out with my first supervisor on Monday. So of course, there'll be a few things I can share and happy to share as well. So thank you.
Fantastic. I'll connect the two of you then. I see a question from Kate as well, but in the interest of time, can I just hold off on that and bring on our next speaker, Wissam Wakian, who is also a PhD researcher from the University of Bath, but this time from the School of Social Policy. Over to you, Wissam.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Mercy, and congratulations, Mercy, for submitting your draft. That's fantastic, and I'm in this stage as well of thinking of how much more time I have left before I have to submit my first draft. So that was really nice to hear, and I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much for sharing experiences that a lot of us can relate to. I think so much that you said was something that I'll talk about as well in my own presentation, and maybe a bit more about the struggles I faced with analysis and a decolonial analysis specifically. But before that, I think I figured out, we were trying earlier how to present my screen, and I think I figured out how to do it. So if you guys see my screen, can you let me know? Yeah?
Yes, perfect.
That's
Full screen
fantastic.
as well.
Okay. I think now all I need to do is switch to this. Yeah, okay, so now I have, yeah, we're set. So yes, so hello everyone. My name is Wissam Wakian, and I am a PhD candidate, yes, at the University of Bath, nearing completion, hopefully. Today, yeah, so I think my screen is the slide changing, or is it still the title slide?
It is still the title slide at the moment.
And it's glitching as well. Can you hear me? Oh,
I can hear you.
Yeah, is the audio clear, or
Yes,
is my audio
yes.
glitching as well?
The
All's
audio
good?
seems
Okay,
to be
yeah.
clear from me, at least.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share in a traditional way, because what happened is I think it's not changing for you guys. The slides aren't changing. So let me just share it as the presentation is like this. Okay. And then, yeah, so so if you guys could give me a second, I'm just going to give a bit of a context on what this presentation will cover. And the word that I've used as a title for the slide is today's ta'lila. And ta'lila is it's a Bedouin word or a traditional word to talk about or to describe a very intimate conversation shared in a specific context, but used in the more modern age as having a nice gathering and a beautiful conversation. So for today's talk, what I would like to talk about is my research experience around the use of decolonial approaches in my thinking alongside my own tribe. I'm a Bedouin from central Jordan, and I come from a tribe that has kind of supported me as a social network for my life, and yet I came and pursued my higher education in England. And this meant that the experience itself would put me in a situation where the context was no longer one with access to such a strong network. Rather, that change kind of came from, leaving a rural tribal setting, a community, and moving abroad to Bath. And this had such an impact on my day-to-day that it intensely began to impact my PhD as well. And it showed me where the value I carried, what knowledge I valued in this life, and the knowledge that I valued from home. I'd like to move to the next slide, but just for the sake of making sure everyone can hear me, can I just get a thumbs up if the audio is clear, if you guys can still see? Yeah, because that's perfect. Yeah, that's all I needed. Thank you. Okay, So excellent. So now I can speak freely. Yeah, so for a bit about my research, like Mercy said, you can really understand someone when you understand maybe where they come from and a bit about their background in their academic world. So for the context, my research explores the experiences of indigenous Bedouin women from my tribe, the Wikhian, and they are a pastoral tribe that historically would seasonally migrate. Sorry if the video doesn't work, but you get maybe more of an image in the map. Yeah, so this community and this landscape, it carries profound Abrahamic religious significance. Oh, oh, wow. Hey, that's funny, actually. Sorry. So this video is a collection of shorts. That's so funny. It's a collection of shorts, and one of them was a speeded audio. Anyway, so back to Mount Nebo and where I'm from. So this region is quite significant religiously amongst all three Abrahamic religions, because this is known to be the place where Moses stood and looked over the promised land, but it's also a place where Jesus was baptized. My tribe, I don't know if you can see my mouse or cursor on the screen, but my tribe lived seasonally between Mount Nebo and this valley area here near the spring at the base of this mountain. As continuous inhabitants of these slopes for thousands of years, Bedouin communities have been subjects of discussion, erasure, co-optation, political contestation, and this has happened from ancient empires to modern nation states. And it treats like these people, my people, myself, communities of people, as objects of analysis. And we talk a lot about what that experience will look like in an academic context when we delve into decolonial approaches. So what does it mean to be treated as an object of analysis rather than an epistemic subject? Yeah, so in starting the PhD, I found that my context of this place in central Jordan and the status that it had as a sacred location was politicized in academic literature across well, you can say modern, but also quite classic literatures as well. But it's an area that has always been, perceived externally, colonially, by biblical explorers in their travel logs. Orientalists, as you can see here, is Gertrude Bell, Orientalists in anthropological scholarships, even Zionist colonial occupation, modern state making, UNESCO international heritage development projects, always understanding who the Bedouin is, but from an external lens. So I wanted to take some time and really question, what does it mean for an organization like UNESCO, an international organization, or even esteemed academics to take a look and claim whether something was considered intangible heritage? This is the framework that's used. And what does that mean for Bedouin people or Bedouin communities? And I saw that it led to a lot of performative spectacles about what it means to be a Bedouin. And I saw that a lot in the academic literature. And this led to a lot of epistemic marginalization. I found that in studying in the UK, there are certain ways in which academic research is considered rigorous. It's considered esteemed or peer-reviewed or accepted in certain contexts. And it doesn't necessarily align with some indigenous practices of knowledge production. So this is an image of the side of the mountain, and if you can see in the valley, that's where my ancestors, my tribe has had land for many years. The conflict, though, around my research was finding out that this land in 1932 was purchased by the Franciscan custody, so this became under the ownership of the Vatican. This was done in 1932, and 52 dunams is, I'm not quite sure what would be the metric conversion for 52 dunams, or if that is the metrics, but the land that was bought in Mount Nebo and the Moses Spring, where my tribe ancestrally have lived and grazed for many years, was a purchase done through the state of Jordan. And I think what I'm finding interesting in my research is, what does it mean to call a place sacred, and what does this sacred acquisition mean when you have communities of marginalized people, indigenous communities that are displaced, their pastoral traditions are becoming obsolete or transformed, their understanding of tribe and community will shift and change. Yeah, so I don't want to spend too much time to talk about the location, but I do want to, I do want to get a chance to speak a bit about my research and what was it that I wanted to try to understand from this this dilemma that I felt I was that was very personal to me. And I think this is something really interesting about Mercy's presentation and my own, is how intimate and personal our experiences are with our research topic. And my doctoral research is examining relational epistemologies that emerge from Bedouin women's everyday practices in this area. I definitely use ethnographic fieldwork. I collected oral histories, and I began by looking into decolonial feminist methods and approaches. In the pictures, you can see different women, some who I know, some related to me, some who have passed, but women who are Jordanian and each kind of carrying a certain maybe message in a visual or in a video footage. And overall, I felt that while I was trying to do research, what I struggled with in academic literature was that these women that I saw on a very regular basis appeared as carriers of culture or tradition, but their epistemic labor, their everyday practice of storytelling, of care, of moral reasoning, and religious, or sorry, not just religious, but relational mediation, it was becoming something that was untheorized, or it was something that I felt was largely untheorized. And because of this, I felt that this led to a double displacement for Bedouin people. So they are treated as historical or cultural objects rather than sites of theory, and Bedouin women are rendered visible as symbols, while their way of knowing, or maybe their practice or their everyday, or the way that they raise in family or how they live in family and commune is something that is not conceptualized. My data set, so on this slide, you can see a few things that, some things that I've collected that represent my data. So we took walks to very old landmarks, and these are scattered across the area, and you have historic remnants across Jordan, and not just in Madaba, but in my region specifically. A lot of the tribal people, historically have lived amongst these relics, these ancient relics. And so we do a lot of walks and kind of trips around in our area to visit these sites. And I've done one-to-one, interviews with the women of my tribe. We did walkabouts, which come from like indigenous cultures in Australia, this idea of walking and sharing, but had events as well where people came together, we hiked, we had conversation, and that led to a data set that was deliberately multimodal. And I worked with, like I said, interviews, focus group sessions, and collected oral histories. But what I found out was when you sit in certain contexts, you have to be sensitive to the idea that maybe people approach sharing knowledge differently to the way that you might come comfortably with. So I definitely came in with my interview questions ready, and I had my ethics, I understood what I needed to do for my ethics approval. But it's in the midst of doing the data collection that you start to notice, like Mercy said, that certain things you need to be flexible and see how you can adapt to the environment around you. So a lot of the data I started to collect was also WhatsApp voice notes that were shared in digital spaces, photographs, community walks. And it led to my research becoming very embodied and reminding me what it meant to live amongst a tribe, and how to have done work that I think that's something I'll get to in a bit. What does embodiment mean to me? But I think what I found was that in doing research, you need to be present with the community in a way where you build rapport. And for me, that happened when I started to see how I couldn't really transcribe things like this. I couldn't transcribe a wedding ceremony. I couldn't transcribe a voice note from my aunt, which had such beautiful cadence and history and emotion. And I felt that reducing that to a text to a text transcript, it felt like a violation of the knowledge. And it felt that when it came to analysis, that was what I kept feeling worried about and feeling like I wouldn't do justice to what was shared with me. So what I'm going to say next is not that that should intimidate anyone from doing research with an Indigenous community or feeling emotionally present. I think that tension is actually a beautiful thing. I think noticing it and not shying away from it, it's not a negative quality of you. If it's the opposite, it shows how much you are present with what you believe in and what you're working on. So here I'd like to talk about what kind of curiosity I had and why did I find that conventional analysis was insufficient to me, and why this data it didn't align with all I was reading. I found all this beautiful decolonial scholarship from Latin America that really was the groundwork that opened up my eyes to the importance of looking into alternative ways of collecting data, creative ways, like Mercy was also mentioning. I really appreciate arts-based methods and finding ways that you can, reach knowledge that doesn't necessarily follow a Western individualist, maybe I would say sometimes egocentric process of data collection. And the goal was to understand how these women in sedentarized Jordan, no longer nomadic, no longer tribal, how did these communities use everyday practice to sustain and reinterpret and transmit their Bedouin tribal identity and ways of knowing in a certain way. So my research was grounded in, you could say, like a grounded theory, but it was an understanding of how knowledge and epistemology within a tribe is created in relation to land and created in relation to faith and relational obligations, and how the practices, they constitute alternative frameworks. And I think just for the sake of time, I'm going to just say a couple more things on this slide here, but mainly I was trying to see how we can move away from traditional ways of doing research that were built on maybe models that are like archives, or, for example, looking at, institutions and external theoretical frameworks to understand my own community, but rather looking at what knowledge comes from within that community itself. So relational, gendered, faith-inflected, everyday worlds, treating a Bedouin woman's life and practices as sites of theory and epistemic authority. In my research, I found that writing, it's not a separate phase. It was something that was happening very fluidly. So I would read and I would listen and I would write. I feel the PhD, for a lot of PhD students, I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf, but from my own experience, I found that the process, it showed me how I needed to step away from this constraint, and I had to be more flexible when it came to understanding work and work ethic and knowledge production. And it pushed me so much, and the challenge was so significant that I realized there were so many different things that were maybe a structure that I was trying to work within that didn't align. So I struggled in translating, not just between Arabic and English, and not just between the dialect of a Bedouin dialect and a city dialect, but it was also translating this performative, embodied day-to-day living into a thesis. And I think I didn't want to lose the heartbeat or like this relational ethic that we built together as a tribe and a community by following something that I thought was very intellectual. So epistemology and unlearning bureaucracies. And this is in the early days of my PhD, and I felt that tension between a university's demands and kind of what I was learning from the community, the responsibility and the trust that I had shared. Mercy was talking about this is so important, that feeling of not carrying a guilt and letting it burden you, but being conscious and aware that you are in this tension between, acknowledging you're working within an institution, but also trying to make sure you kind of build the space for yourself. And how I did that was, in my analysis, I often describe my research not as something that is a project I manage, but as a practice that I live. I think I try to keep conscious that being embodied is not a bias. It's not to be minimized. It's actually at the heart and the foundation of my research. I find that you must be And it's not just during the collection of the data, it's in your day-to-day life. You have to honor that culture that you're working with, because whether you are working with, you know, whichever group your research focus is, you know, you owe it to that community to be reflexive and honest about where you sit with what comes up in the conversations. And I think that transparency and that reflexivity is so interesting when you're an insider outsider. Again, another thing that, you know, I can relate to as well from what was said is how much of my experience in Bath informed my experience back home when I would do my fieldwork and collect my data, and vice versa, how much of my experience abroad was impacted by being amongst my community and that support. Sorry. So the next thing that I noticed was that in order to feel like my research was creating the the space for these types of conversations that I found decolonial, or that I found participatory, I relaunched my community initiative with the women from our village. And this is a cooperative where people came together to speak about heritage and identity and culture. We were a virtual archive online, and we were kind of hosting workshops for local talents that talked about the community's heritage and their stories. And this was very helpful for my PhD because it also allowed me the time to sit with groups of women and notice how much more data, how much it felt less like data, and it felt more like some profound knowledge when it was happening in a group setting, in a shared space. So it was in these moments, starting up this initiative again and having meetings and collective meetings, that it helped me remember that knowledge that's made and allows for the storytelling and the performative elements that are normal in day-to-day living. I think this is where I was slowly starting to better understand my research. And with time that happened, I think the longer I started to immerse myself with my community, the better I felt confident and understood, yeah, what was it that I was trying to present in my research. So in this slide here, I'd like to talk about whose knowledge counts in a sacred landscape. And I think with indigenous societies, this is very interesting, or with any marginalized community, it's very important to understand what is it that is a source of or a space for knowledge production for them, and what is something that they have strong ties to. And I think for a lot of indigenous communities, the relationship to land, and decolonial research very much talks about the importance of no longer staying within the understandings of decoloniality as a metaphor, but moving towards, for some, land back, and for some other things. But in the case of my research, what do decolonial practices of data sovereignty, anonymity, and participatory action research even mean when we work in institutions that reward individual authorship, abstraction, citation, that enable colonial regimes and global capitalist environmental devastation to ancestral lands? What does it mean? What is it that, how can we get past that guilt that was mentioned in a really nice question that was asked a second ago? And I think for indigenous Bedouin communities, oral and visual data, they are precious. The data that you collect is so precious. And it's a cultural asset that must be respected with your research. But I also think land is an epistemological domain in which knowledge is collectively constructed. And I can speak on behalf of what I've noticed amongst my community. And yeah, to not go too deep into my own research about what land means for my own tribe, what I think would be really interesting to kind of like say is, yeah, by integrating indigenous epistemologies or Bedouin women's epistemologies that are rooted in embodied knowledge and shared community practice and alternative histories of land use and how to use the land, you begin to challenge the premise that land is a resourceless wasteland, like is the description of the area where our tribes are from, or land is this thing that can be used for the tourism industry in some ways. And rather, you can look at these epistemologies that come from the place itself and see how that is something we crave in modern society today, and how that can benefit our day-to-day practices as not only academics, but as people. And to conclude, sorry, I feel like I'm a little over time, but to conclude, decolonial research is practical to me, and I felt that it was about building an infrastructure where data doesn't sit on a university server, but it serves as a resource for the village where my research is coming from, where this data comes from. And I felt that the divide between my thesis and my activism, it's not really a problem, but this tension was something, and there's also so many nice academics that talk about the importance of being in the discomfort. It was my method. It was a part of my method. And I like the idea of looking at local epistemologies and prioritizing community and collective knowledge production. And yeah, this idea of tribal epistemic inclusion, it's not a gesture, and decolonization is not a word or a metaphor. It's the understanding that there is a necessary act for academics to take a role where they look at decolonization as a way of exposing how academic, political, environmental, developmental stewardship, this idea of we're stewards or we know better or we're here to help, that we understand this stewardship has been used to justify erasure of these communities, many communities, and that we need to make the space for the community to be able to analyze their past and actively, curate their futures, or our futures, in my case. So I'm really sorry if I'm over time, and I really hope that the internet didn't fail me through the presentation, but thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much, Wissam. The internet didn't fail you. We heard every single word loud and clear.
That's great.
I'm not even ashamed to admit that I lost track of time just listening to
Oh my
your
God, bless you.
presentation, and it was fantastic.
Thank
What a way of intertwining your own story, your research, just into that wonderful presentation. I know that I'm already seeing hands. I'm just going to post some links. I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to post some links to participants, just so we can hear from you what you'd like us to put on in the future, so that we can continue to invite amazing presenters like Mercy and Wissam. But I'll jump straight into a few questions now. Can we have Ross first, please? See, I'm going to allow you to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. Love the presentation. Love what you stand for. You touched my heart. I was struck by these words. Giving back is part of the method, not an outcome added later. I'm working with childhood sexual harm, and quite often I am told that because I'm doing the research, giving someone an opportunity to talk about what's happened is cathartic. I don't think that is enough. So I'm asking you, in your research, what other things were you giving back, or do you think I might be able to give back that you have used, so that it isn't, so it's part of the method, and not just saying, well, this will be cathartic for you to tell me about how awful your past was. If you've got any ideas. If you haven't, I get that too.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your question. I found this is the part that really made me struggle with the PhD from the beginning, just feeling that it didn't feel enough, no matter, what kind of data felt like I was coming in and doing something, leaving. And I know from friends as well, there was always this desire to see how can we, even financially in certain ways, provide some kind of compensation. And I feel trying to put myself in a situation where I do something that is authentic to me, that is within, like Mercy said, within your capacity. I found it was something that is necessary for me. And one of the things that helped me with that was the fact that I had done some community organizing prior to doing the PhD. And the initiative, I showed you guys a logo of it a second ago. This was an initiative we started pre-COVID, and it was a collective of women in the tribe that would meet regularly and talk about social concerns and issues, and invited guests to the community. And I think for me, getting funding, helping a local initiative, that it was an initiative we started, but for me to feel like whatever resources and funding I can get from donating, donors or from institutions, and being able to be that intermediary. I think we come from a place of privilege, myself specifically, like studying at a university like Bath. It really did put me in a context where I was meeting and connecting and networking with so many groups and so many people. And I found that the story that we have access to, it comes with responsibility, and there are so many unique ways that you can go to the community and understand what is a need in that time and place and space, but finding a way in which you can do that without losing authenticity to yourself. And of course there are certain things you can and certain things you can't do, and finding that balance and accepting you're human and that you can only do as much as within your capacity to do. But I definitely would suggest looking into initiatives and groups. I think there's so many people like myself that I pursued the PhD because I was so frustrated with community organizing, and I felt that we had so much to offer and so much to say and so much to do and so much I was just learning, and I felt like I wanted to get it out. And when I got accepted at the university and I had that platform, I felt that that was what I needed to try my best to keep doing and be authentic and make the space very horizontal as much as you can. So I don't know if it really answers the question, if I've just kind of maybe rolled on about that, but I don't know. I hope that kind of cleared up a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. You answered the second question I had in my mind. Why did you do the PhD? And that was beautiful to hear, but also about doing the support groups. Those are things that you can also do as part of the method to give back. And for me, that's the most important thing, because I'm from an extracted people and that is not my job. I want to make things better. So thank you very much, and lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Next, Sarish.
Hi there, Wissam. Thank you so much for such an excellent, deeply inspirational, and I would also say timely, relevant presentation. So thank you so much. There were a lot of elements in your project that related to mine, and I could see elements in there. I am actually currently very much at the early stages of my PhD, and I'm looking at young Muslim women of color, how they navigate and construct their intersectional identities, especially in higher educational spaces. And I'm using critical race feminist perspectives, but I feel somehow a bit frustrated sometimes with those perspectives as well. And in my ethics, I was supposed to do some sort of support resources for my participants, but now that I'm gathering data, I don't want to use them because I feel like they feel a bit rude to my participants, as if I am the uni, or I am looking down on my participants, that they don't have lives that are fulfilled, or somehow it feels a bit of a pity on the participants. I've not used them, even though I'm supposed to give them and send them out after the data collection. Now, my question to you is, I wonder how you have dealt with this academic white gaze on your project, because especially as it so often exoticizes projects that are looking into deeply decolonial and feminist work. I wonder how you've dealt with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well. I really like your question. There was something I really felt while you were speaking, when you were talking about sharing resource. Oh no.
We can still hear you, Wissam. It's just
Oh no, what's happening?
Your camera's frozen.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. Hi, Wissam. We can still hear you. Hello, Wissam.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Oh my days.
Okay. I don't know if Wissam can hear,
Hello?
but hi, Wissam. We can hear you.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, Wissam.
Hi, can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. I don't think Wissam can hear us, but what I'll do is, Serish, I'll just connect you with Wissam after the session, so she can respond to you. Tarif, I don't know if
Oh,
you
can you
got
hear
your.
me? Sorry.
Hi, we can hear
Sorry,
you, Wissam.
can you guys hear me now?
We can
Okay,
hear
sorry,
you.
I didn't. Did you lose me for a bit, or was it just that I'm losing my mind?
We heard you, but yeah, you didn't
Maybe
hear
I
us.
couldn't hear you guys. That's all
I
right.
was
Sorry, just
sorry, I was
fumbling.
just suggesting because I'm mindful of time
Yeah,
as well. I was just suggesting if
yeah,
maybe perhaps you could I could connect you with Serish by email after the session.
that
Would
would be
that,
great. Yeah, and I
yeah,
also have yeah, maybe I can also speak to Taraf. I think this is my
yeah,
friend as well that I can speak to, if that's all right with you
of
guys.
course. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Right, I will make sure to share emails. All right, okay. Well, thank you very much to everyone who has joined us today. Sorry we're a bit over time, but I think if you've stayed if you stayed all this time, then perhaps you will also have really enjoyed the session, or at least found it useful. So I'd just like to give my thanks once again to Mercy, Martins, and Wissam working for their wonderful contribution today. And yeah, hope to see you at our next webinars. Have a good rest of your day.